in the audition, you got to play a cover song or do something to hear them sing. And Dave was like, nah, don't play any covers. Why don't you play one of your songs, and I'm going to just improvise. And it was, I mean, I don't want to sound cliche, but it was a magical moment. We heard him just kind of listening to a riff that we were working on, and after it cycled around like one time, the second time around, he started singing this melody that was just a big hook, and it stuck in our heads. So we knew that there was something, you know, that was working there.
What about when you two started hanging around together? What were you listening to? Not in '92. If that was the year, or I think that would have been around the time of the Seattle sound, and you know, Pearl Jam were just coming into their own. Nirvana were sort of still around and doing things at that point. What was you know, coming out of your speakers then?
I was always a big Pantera head.
Yeah.
Everything was just always about Pantera.
Yeah.
And going back to those days, that was the time when Danny's band rehearsed down the hall from me, and my band rehearsed, and well, tried to rehearse, and I'd show up early and I'd be doing my thing, and Danny was always the guy that showed up early and stayed late at his, and so I always heard him playing, and he always heard me playing, and was always made a mental note, hey, maybe someday, you know, I'm gonna jam with this guy, and just kind of built from there, really.
Right.
Yeah, you kind of have to. It's the same thing with me. I took that mental note, you know, always kept it in the back of my head that he shared the same work ethic. You know, this is the type of guys you don't want to surround yourself with, somebody that wanted this more than anything and that was going to work for it. And you know, as far as bands or influences at that time, and we all grew up to the classic metal bands, you know, so from Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, up to Pantera, like Mike said. But you know, I started getting into some of the grunge bands at that time too, like Alice in Chains and Soundgarden were a big influence on me as well. You know, just as a guitar player, I really respected Jerry Cantrell and what he was doing with Alice in Chains. Very melodic player, and you know, you learn from everybody throughout every decade. You know, you pick up a little bit here and there, but our biggest passion, the reason to pick up an instrument in the first place, was the classic metal bands.
Yeah. So, like, being a big fan of Pantera, and then, you know, very recently, Vinnie Paul raving about the Asylum album. So, you know, where you start off the fan of him, he's become the fan of you.
It's a pretty surreal thing, you know, to have him. He was one of my idols, just as a drummer, you know, not just being the band Pantera, but as a drummer, he was a big influence on me, and over the years to become. To have him go from idol to peer and then the friend and then fan has been a pretty cool thing. It's interesting how things sometimes, you know, come around at full circle, but it's definitely surreal.
I think one of the most flattering things to us over the years have been getting those compliments from the guys who have been around longer than us. And we don't expect it to come from so much of the newer bands who feel, you know, a little more competitive about it or whatever it may be, but you know, we've been approached by a lot of, you know, old school guys from the 80s or 90s that have come up that said they're fans of the band. You know, so that's you know, that's a good sense of accomplishment that our idols are taking notice of us now.
Yeah. Do you ever go back and listen to The Sickness?
Sure.
Yeah, for sure.
You
I mean,
put it on, play it.
Yeah, I'll do it sometimes. I'll go back and listen to all the albums and just kind of reflect on them and pick those moments that, you know, I mean, we're proud of all of those moments, you know, but they're also personal to us. But it's cool to kind of go back in that old headspace of thinking, God, these are songs we wrote in the garage days, you know, and to see where it's gotten us and where, you know, the stepping stone that it was in our career.
It's an interesting album, The Sickness, in that you know, in its day it wasn't a really big seller, was it? But in retrospect, it went on to become a huge seller over the years.
I think a lot of that has to do with going back to our work ethic of just being on the road and just being, you know, road dogs, just out there constantly touring and connecting live and building that fan base from the ground up. I mean, our first album sales, I think in the States, was only like a little bit over 3,000, and it just slowly over the years, it built and built and built, and by the time Down with the Sickness came out as a single, it was our last single on that album. The album had climbed over 3 million at that time, and then, you know, now today it's over 4 million. So it was just a slow, steady climb, and I think we're even more appreciative that it happened that way because we knew that we built that. It wasn't an overnight success. It wasn't a big marketing plan. It wasn't a trendy thing that everybody caught on within a short period of time. It was something that we built.
So I guess then when the Believe album came along, did that sort of take you by surprise when it debuted at #1?
And for sure, I don't think we didn't expect that at all. I mean, you know, we knew that we built a large fan base at that point, but you know, for our fans to kind of step up and help us accomplish something like that in a day and age where pop music and hip hop dominate the charts, it was a pretty nice surprise for us to, you know, achieve something like that.
Were there pressures within the band at that point? Because that was around the time of the first lineup change, wasn't it?
Well, we had Fuzz, our bass player, for the Believe album as well too. So we were on the road for almost 2 years of touring off the sickness with really hardly any time off between tours. It was maybe come home for 2 or 3 days, go back out on the next tour, and then we started writing for Believe as soon as we finished up, like two years into it. Immediately, me and Mike and our former bass player start working on the next batch of material, and at that point we were ready for a new album. We were ready for new material, and so I think we were anxious to get it going. So it happened. It got together pretty quick.
And you know, the big tour at the moment, I guess, you know, it's almost a bit like having your own Ozfest now, because, you know, at one point you got to sort of become the headlining act on an Ozfest, and now you've got this group of bands that you're touring the world with, which must be, you know, an exciting time for you guys as well to, you know, be able to pull off a tour like this and take it around the planet.
Yeah, for sure. I think the thing in the earlier years for us, it's been a lot of us just going out on our own, or maybe picking up a local act in certain markets, and, you know, to get to the point to where we are an established headlining act and able to bring out some you know, bands that add value to it. We just finished up a tour in the U.S. and in Canada where we had Korn out with us in Seven Dust, and they have Korn co-headline with us on the bill. Just it made it a great tour. It was just a big turnout, and I just think, you know, strength and great bands combined on that bill.
Yeah. Well, I'll throw one final question at you, Dan, and this one's about your guitar technique, which I'm sure a lot of guitarists would be interested to hear about. This recipe for the drop C and how it came about.
You know, I only mess around with 3 tunings in there, and I haven't gone any lower than the drop C tuning. I mostly, a lot of our stuff is drop C sharp, and a few songs are just standard tuning, just a half step down, so E flat. But drop C has been about the lowest so far that I've gone, because I don't know. I think sometimes if you start getting lower than that, then you start losing some of the tone and the definition and the clarity in the chords and that. So yeah, no big secret to it. I mean, a lot of bands like to go a lot lower than that, but that's their choice, and it may work for them. But for this band, we've been pretty comfortable with those 3 tunings. Yeah.
Well, Dan, Mike, the band is Disturbed. There's the album, Asylum, and great to have you here again at Undercover.
Thank you.